The atmosphere inside the courtroom was thick with tension as two young individuals stood before Judge Patricia Williams, their futures hanging in the balance of DNA results and testimonies that would determine not just paternity, but the trajectory of multiple lives forever. Jasmine Rodriguez, barely 18 years old, clutched a diaper bag in one hand while her other arm cradled a sleeping infant whose tiny chest rose and fell with the peaceful rhythm of innocence, completely unaware of the legal battle unfolding around him. Across the aisle stood Marcus Thompson, also 18, his youthful face bearing an expression that fluctuated between defiance and fear, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of jeans that hung loosely on his thin frame. Behind Jasmine sat her mother, Carmen Rodriguez, a woman whose weathered face told stories of her own struggles raising children too young, her eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that could melt steel. Marcus's grandmother, Dorothy Thompson, sat behind him with her Bible clutched to her chest, occasionally shaking her head and whispering prayers that seemed to dissipate into the air-conditioned courtroom atmosphere. The baby 3-month-old Isaiah represented more than just a question of biological connection. He symbolized the collision of adolescence and adult responsibility, of dreams deferred and futures redefined. Judge Williams surveyed the scene before her with the seasoned eye of someone who had presided over countless similar cases, yet each one carried its own unique heartbreak and hope. The courtroom itself seemed to hold its breath as the judge prepared to hear opening statements, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, the American flag standing sentinel in the corner, and the scales of justice mounted on the wall serving as a silent reminder that truth, however painful, must prevail. Jasmine's attorney, a court-appointed lawyer named Michael Chen, organized his papers methodically, preparing to present a timeline of events that would paint Marcus as the undeniable father. Meanwhile, Marcus's public defender, Sarah Mitchell, readied herself to introduce reasonable doubt, to suggest that her young client was perhaps one of several possibilities, not out of malice but out of genuine uncertainty. The stenographer's fingers hovered over her machine, ready to capture every word of testimony that would become part of the permanent record. Security officers stood at strategic positions, their presence a reminder that emotions in family court could escalate quickly, especially when young parents felt cornered or attacked. Outside the courtroom windows, life in the city continued its relentless pace, cars honking, people rushing to appointments, completely unaware of the intimate drama unfolding in this small corner of the justice system. This case represented a growing phenomenon in America, where teenage pregnancy rates, though declining overall, still left thousands of young people navigating parenthood before they had fully navigated their own adolescence. The judge glanced at the file before her, noting that both Jasmine and Marcus had been high school sweethearts, their relationship beginning in sophomore year when hormones raged stronger than common sense, and the future seemed impossibly distant. Now that future had arrived with startling swiftness, demanding answers, accountability, and decisions that would ripple through generations. Judge Williams cleared her throat and began the proceedings with her characteristic blend of firmness and compassion, understanding that the young people before her needed guidance as much as they needed judgment, their brains still developing the frontal lobe functions that governed impulse, control, and long-term planning. Miss Rodriguez, the judge began, her voice carrying authority tempered with warmth. Please tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Thompson and the circumstances surrounding Isaiah's conception. Jasmine stood slowly, carefully transferring the baby to her mother's waiting arms, her hands trembling slightly as she approached the witness stand, her sneakers squeaking softly against the polished courtroom floor. She wore her best outfit, a simple dress that her mother had purchased specifically for this hearing, modest and presentable, attempting to project maturity beyond her years. As she settled into the witness chair and placed her hand on the Bible to be sworn in, her voice cracked when she promised to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The bailiff stepped back, and Jasmine took a deep breath, her eyes finding her mother's for strength before beginning her testimony. Marcus and I started dating when we were 15. She explained, her voice gaining steadiness as she spoke. We were in the same biology class, and he used to make me laugh during lectures. We started hanging out after school, going to the park, talking about our dreams and what we wanted to do after graduation. Her attorney nodded encouragingly, prompting her to continue with the narrative that would establish the foundation of their case. We were together for almost 2 years before I got pregnant. I know people think teenagers just go around sleeping with everyone, but Marcus was my first, my only. Her voice carried a mixture of defensiveness and vulnerability, the words of someone forced to expose intimate details to strangers in positions of authority. Judge Williams listened intently, taking notes, her expression neutral but attentive. "When did you first become intimate with Mr. Thompson?" The judge asked directly, cutting through any euphemistic language to get to the facts that mattered legally. Jasmine's cheeks flushed pink, her discomfort palpable. "It was right after we turned 16, Your Honor. It was at his house when his grandmother was at work. We didn't plan it really, it just kind of happened. We watched a movie and started kissing, and then things went further than we expected." The honesty in her voice was undeniable, the admission carrying no pride, only the factual recounting of decisions made in moments of teenage passion. "Did you use protection?" Judge Williams asked, her tone remaining neutral and clinical despite the personal nature of the question. Jasmine shook her head, her eyes dropping to her lap in shame. "Not that first time. After that, we tried to be more careful, but we weren't always consistent. Sometimes Marcus said he would pull out, and I believed that would be enough because I didn't really understand how pregnancy worked. They taught us abstinence in health class, but didn't really explain the actual biology of what could happen." Her testimony highlighted a common thread in teen pregnancy cases, the intersection of inadequate sex education, adolescent impulsivity, and the false sense of invincibility that characterized the teenage years. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Jasmine continued her testimony, establishing the timeline of their relationship and the moment she discovered she was pregnant, a revelation that had occurred in the girls' bathroom at school when a friend had noticed she'd been sick every morning for 2 weeks and suggested she take a test. When I saw those 2 pink lines, I felt like my whole world stopped. Jasmine testified, her voice breaking with emotion as she recalled that pivotal moment 3 months before her senior year was set to begin. "I sat in that bathroom stall for probably 20 minutes, just staring at the test, hoping it would change, hoping I'd misread it somehow. But it didn't change. I was pregnant at 17, and I had no idea what to do." Her mother Carmen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, remembering her own teenage pregnancy with Jasmine, the cycle repeating itself despite her best efforts to warn her daughter about the consequences of early sexual activity. Judge Williams allowed Jasmine to compose herself before asking the critical question that brought them all to court that day. "When did you inform Mr. Thompson about the pregnancy, and what was his initial reaction?" Jasmine glanced over at Marcus, their eyes meeting briefly before she looked away, unable to hold his gaze while recounting what came next. "I told him the next day after school. We went to the same park where we used to hang out, and I just blurted it out. I said, 'Marcus, I'm pregnant.' And he just stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language." She paused, gathering the courage to continue with the painful memory. "At first, he didn't say anything. He just stood up and started pacing back and forth. Then he asked me if I was sure, and I showed him the test I'd kept in my backpack. He looked at it for a long time, and then he asked if I was sure it was his." The courtroom fell silent at this revelation, the first hint of the dispute that would eventually bring them before a judge. Jasmine's voice hardened slightly as she continued. "That hurt me so bad, Your Honor. I'd never been with anyone else. He was my first and only partner, but he said that his boys had been telling him that girls sometimes try to trap guys with babies, and he needed to be sure. I was so angry and hurt that I left the park and didn't talk to him for a week. The judge made detailed notes, understanding that this initial response would become central to understanding Marcus's continued denial of paternity. What happened after that week of not speaking? Judge Williams prompted. Jasmine's expression softened slightly. He came to my house and apologized. He said he'd been scared and stupid, and that he believed me. He said we would figure it out together. He even came with me to my first prenatal appointment. We looked at the ultrasound together, and he seemed excited. He kept pointing at the screen, asking the nurse questions about the baby. For a moment, hope flickered across both young faces, a memory of a time when they'd faced the unexpected pregnancy as a team. The testimony took a darker turn as Jasmine described the deterioration of their relationship during her second trimester, when her body began showing obvious signs of pregnancy, and the reality of impending parenthood became impossible to ignore or deny. Things started getting hard around month 5. Jasmine explained, her hands unconsciously moving to her stomach as if remembering the weight she'd carried there. Marcus started missing our appointments. He'd make excuses about having to work or help his grandmother, but I'd see him hanging out with his friends at the mall or playing basketball at the park. When I'd confront him, he'd get defensive and say he needed time to think, that this was all happening too fast. Judge Williams leaned forward slightly, her attention focused entirely on the young woman's testimony. Did Mr. Thompson provide any financial support during your pregnancy? The question struck at the heart of one aspect of the case, the issue of support, both emotional and financial. Jasmine shook her head emphatically. No, Your Honor. He kept saying he was trying to save money, but I never saw any of it. My mom bought all the baby stuff, the crib, the clothes, the diapers, everything. She was working 2 jobs to afford it all because my dad isn't in the picture either. It was hard watching her sacrifice so much while Marcus acted like nothing was happening. The resentment in her voice was palpable, the accumulated frustration of months of feeling abandoned by the person who had promised to face parenthood together. Carmen Rodriguez nodded vigorously from her seat, her own testimony scheduled for later in the proceedings. Did there come a point when Mr. Thompson explicitly denied paternity? The judge asked, knowing this was the crucial element that distinguished disappointment and fear from outright rejection. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. Yes, Your Honor. It was about 2 weeks before I gave birth. We got into a huge fight because he'd missed another doctor's appointment, and I told him he needed to step up and be a man about this, and he just exploded. He said, her voice caught, and she had to pause to collect herself. He said that he'd been thinking about it, and that the timing didn't add up. He said that he'd heard from some girl at school that I'd been flirting with guys at a party back when we first started dating, and that maybe the baby wasn't his after all. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and was there any truth to this allegation? Judge Williams asked, her tone making clear that the question was necessary, not judgmental. No, Your Honor. Jasmine stated firmly. I never cheated on Marcus, not once, not ever. I don't even know what party he was talking about. When we first started dating, I barely went to any parties because my mom was strict about curfew. I think he was just looking for an excuse, looking for a way out of taking responsibility. Marcus's attorney stood to begin cross-examination, her expression sympathetic but professional as she approached the witness stand, where Jasmine sat with her arms crossed defensively, prepared for the attack she knew was coming. Miss Rodriguez, you testified that Marcus was your first and only sexual partner. Is that correct? Sarah Mitchell asked, her tone gentle but probing. Yes, that's correct. Jasmine affirmed, her jaw set in determination. And you're absolutely certain about that? There's no possibility, even from a single encounter, that you might have forgotten or minimized that someone else could be Isaiah's father. The attorney's questions were designed to introduce doubt without being overtly accusatory. Jasmine's response was immediate and forceful. I'm 100% certain. I know who I've been with, and it's only been Marcus. I understand why you have to ask, but asking the same question different ways isn't going to change my answer. Judge Williams intervened before the attorney could continue that line of questioning. Miss Mitchell, I think we've established the witness's position on this matter. Do you have other areas you'd like to explore? The attorney nodded, switching tactics. Miss Rodriguez, you mentioned that during your second trimester, Marcus began distancing himself from you and missing appointments. Is it possible that his withdrawal wasn't about doubting paternity, but about fear? Fear of becoming a father at 18, fear of responsibility, fear of his life changing forever. It was a more sympathetic framing, attempting to paint Marcus as scared rather than callous. Jasmine considered the question carefully before responding. Maybe at first it was fear. I was scared too, but fear doesn't excuse abandonment. Fear doesn't justify telling everyone at school that the baby might not be yours. Fear doesn't make it okay to let my mother struggle to buy baby supplies while you spend money on sneakers and video games. Her response was measured but passionate, acknowledging the humanity in fear while rejecting it as an excuse for Marcus's behavior. You mentioned that Marcus came to your first prenatal appointment. Did he come to any others? The attorney asked, attempting to establish some pattern of involvement. He came to 2 more after that. Jasmine admitted. The one where we found out the sex of the baby and 1 other regular checkup, but then he stopped. Out of 8 appointments, he came to 3, and at the gender reveal, he seemed happy. He told his friends we were having a boy. He even posted about it on social media. So this whole denial thing didn't start until later. This testimony complicated the narrative, showing that Marcus's doubt hadn't been immediate or consistent. Is it possible, the attorney suggested carefully, that someone planted seeds of doubt in Marcus's mind? That perhaps friends or family members who were concerned about him becoming a father, so young, encouraged him to question paternity? Jasmine shrugged. I don't know what people were telling him. All I know is that when things got real, when the baby was about to be born and he would actually have to step up, that's when he started denying Isaiah was his. The morning session concluded with Carmen Rodriguez taking the stand, her testimony providing a parental perspective on the relationship between the 2 teenagers and the events that had led to this courtroom confrontation. Carmen was a woman in her mid-30s who looked older, her face lined with the stress of working multiple jobs while raising children in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and temptations were plentiful. Mrs. Rodriguez, Judge Williams began, please tell the court about your observations of the relationship between your daughter and Mr. Thompson. Carmen sat up straight, her voice strong despite her obvious nervousness about testifying. Your Honor, I liked Marcus at first. He seemed like a good kid. He was respectful when he came to our house. He'd say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. He'd help carry groceries without being asked. I thought he was different from some of the other boys in the neighborhood who were already getting into trouble. That's why I allowed them to date, even though I had my concerns about Jasmine getting serious with anyone so young. Judge Williams nodded, encouraging her to continue. When did you first learn about the pregnancy? Carmen's expression clouded with a mixture of disappointment and resignation. Jasmine told me the same day she took the test. She came home from school crying, went straight to her room, and I knew something was terribly wrong. When she finally told me, I won't lie to you, Your Honor, I was devastated. I'd had Jasmine when I was just 16 myself, and I'd tried so hard to make sure she didn't repeat my mistakes. I'd talked to her about waiting, about focusing on school, about all the things teenage pregnancy had cost me. And here we were, history repeating itself. The pain in her voice was genuine, the anguish of a mother who had tried to break a generational cycle only to see it continue. What was your interaction with Marcus after learning about the pregnancy? The judge inquired. I called him and asked him to come to our house so we could all talk. He came over that evening, and I sat him and Jasmine down at our kitchen table. I asked him straight out if he was the father, and he said yes. I asked him what his intentions were, and he said he wanted to be there for Jasmine and the baby. He promised me he would step up, that he wouldn't run away from his responsibility. I told him I would hold him to that promise. Carmen's voice grew harder as she continued. For a while he kept that promise. He'd come over after school, we'd talk about what they needed to do, about how they'd finish school, about childcare arrangements. His grandmother Dorothy and I even had conversations about how we could support them. But then things changed. She paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm her composure. He stopped coming around as much. When he did come, him and Jasmine would argue. I'd hear him making excuses, saying he needed space, saying this was too much pressure, and then came the day when Jasmine called me at work, crying so hard I could barely understand her, saying Marcus was denying. The baby was his. Carmen's testimony grew more impassioned as she described the impact of Marcus's denial on her daughter and their family, painting a picture of young women struggling with pregnancy while facing rejection from the person who had pledged support. Your Honor, I watched my daughter go through the last weeks of her pregnancy heartbroken and stressed. The doctor said stress wasn't good for the baby, but how could she not be stressed? The father of her child was telling people she cheated, that the baby wasn't his. Kids at school were talking about it, taking sides, making her life miserable. She'd come home crying almost every day. The mother's protective instinct was evident in every word. Her anger at Marcus's treatment of her daughter barely contained by courtroom decorum. I tried calling Marcus myself, tried calling his grandmother, trying to get everyone together to talk this through. Dorothy said Marcus was confused, that he'd been hearing things, that he needed time, but time was running out. The baby was coming whether Marcus was ready or not, whether he believed it was his or not. Judge Williams interjected with a question. Mrs. Rodriguez, did you witness any behavior from your daughter that might have given Marcus reason to doubt paternity? It was a necessary question, testing the mother's objectivity despite her clear advocacy for her daughter. Carmen's response was immediate and firm. Absolutely not, Your Honor. Jasmine is a good girl. She's not perfect, what teenager is, but she's not a liar and she's not promiscuous. She went to school, came home, did her homework, helped around the house. Her whole world was Marcus. Too much of her world was Marcus, if you ask me. She was with him, or texting him, or talking about him constantly. There wasn't time for her to be with anyone else, and more importantly, she wouldn't have wanted to be. She loved that boy with all her heart. The attorney for Marcus stood to cross-examine, approaching the maternal protectiveness with caution. Mrs. Rodriguez, you mentioned that you were very strict with Jasmine, that you monitored her activities closely. But surely even you couldn't know her whereabouts every minute of every day, especially during school hours. Carmen acknowledged the point with a slight nod. That's true. I couldn't be with her every second. I was working. But I raised my daughter to be honest with me, and I trusted her. Maybe that makes me naive in your eyes, but I know my child. The attorney pressed forward gently. Is it possible that in your desire to protect your daughter, to see her in the best light, you might be dismissing the possibility that Marcus's concerns have some validity? The question was designed to suggest bias, to undermine the maternal testimony as inherently prejudiced. Carmen's eyes flashed with controlled anger. I'm not dismissing anything because there's nothing to dismiss. Marcus didn't have concerns. He had cold feet. There's a difference between genuine doubt and looking for an excuse to escape responsibility. After a brief recess, Marcus Thompson took the stand, his posture defensive, his eyes darting nervously between his attorney, the judge, and the spot where Jasmine sat holding Isaiah, who had begun to fuss slightly. At 18, Marcus looked even younger than his age, his frame thin and gangly, his face showing the remnants of adolescent acne, his hands fidgeting constantly with the hem of his shirt. He was sworn in, his voice barely audible as he promised to tell the truth, and his attorney began with softball questions designed to humanize him before the difficult testimony began. Marcus, can you tell the court about your background, your family situation? Sarah Mitchell asked, her tone encouraging. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice gaining slight strength as he spoke. I live with my grandmother, Dorothy Thompson, and my younger brother, Damon. My mom had problems with drugs, and my dad's been in prison since I was like 5, so my grandma raised us. She works as a nursing assistant at a care facility, working long shifts to make ends meet. She's always telling me and my brother that we need to do better than our parents did, that we need to graduate high school and go to college or learn a trade, that we need to break the cycle. His testimony painted a picture of a young man from a difficult background trying to navigate life without consistent parental guidance. Tell the court about your relationship with Jasmine Rodriguez, his attorney prompted. Marcus's expression softened slightly at the mention of her name. Jasmine was my girlfriend. She was smart and funny, and she always believed I could do something with my life even when I didn't believe it myself. We started dating sophomore year, and for a long time everything was good. We'd hang out, go to movies when we had money, just talk for hours about everything and nothing. She was my best friend. Judge Williams watched him carefully, assessing his sincerity. When did your relationship become sexual? She asked directly. Marcus's face flushed with embarrassment. When we were 16, it wasn't something we planned out or talked about a lot beforehand. It just kind of happened one afternoon when my grandma was at work and we were alone at my house. Afterward, I felt guilty about it. My grandma had always told me to respect girls, not to get anyone pregnant, not to mess up my future. But Jasmine and I were in love, or at least I thought we were, and we kept being together like that. His honesty about the guilt suggested some level of conscience, some understanding that actions had consequences. Did you use protection consistently? The judge asked, cutting through embarrassment to get to facts. Marcus shook his head. Not always. Sometimes we did, but other times we didn't have any, or I thought pulling out would work, or we just got caught up in the moment and didn't think about it. I know that was stupid now. The questioning turned to the pregnancy revelation, the pivotal moment when Marcus learned he might become a father at 18. Potentially derailing every plan and aspiration he'd tentatively formed for his future. Marcus, when Jasmine told you she was pregnant, what was your immediate reaction? His attorney asked, knowing that his response to this question would significantly impact the judge's perception of his character. Marcus exhaled slowly, his eyes closing briefly as if reliving that moment. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My mind just went blank for a minute. Then all these thoughts started flooding in. How are we going to take care of a baby? How am I going to finish school? How am I going to tell my grandmother? What's going to happen to my future? I had just gotten accepted into a vocational program for electrical work, something that could actually get me a decent job, and suddenly all of that seemed impossible. His voice carried genuine distress, the testimony of someone whose carefully constructed plans had crumbled in an instant. Is that why you asked if the baby was yours? Judge Williams interjected, her tone stern. Marcus's head dropped. I know that was messed up. I know that hurt her. But in that moment, I was panicking and looking for any possibility that this wasn't really happening, that maybe there was some mistake or it wasn't my responsibility. Some of my boys had been telling me stories about guys who'd been trapped by babies that weren't theirs, and that thought just jumped into my head, but I apologized for that. I told her I believed her and that we'd figure it out together. The judge made notes, her expression revealing nothing. You attended some prenatal appointments, but not all of them. Can you explain why? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I went to the first few. I really tried, Your Honor, but then it started getting real, you know. Like at the gender reveal appointment when we found out we were having a boy. I got excited for a minute, posting about it like it was something to celebrate. But then reality hit me. I'm going to be a father, and I got scared, really scared. I started avoiding Jasmine because every time I saw her belly getting bigger, it reminded me that my life was about to change forever, and I didn't feel ready for it. I know that was wrong. I know I should have been there for her, but I was 18 years old and terrified. His testimony revealed the universal fear of young expectant fathers. The weight of responsibility descending before emotional maturity has fully developed. When did you begin to question paternity? The judge asked, steering toward the central issue of the case. Marcus's hands clenched into fists in his lap. It was maybe a month before the baby was due. I was talking to some guys at school, and they were clowning me about being a teenage dad, saying my life was over, that kind of stuff. And then this girl, Keisha, came up and said something like, "You sure that baby is even yours?" I saw Jasmine all over some dude at Brandon's party back in sophomore year, and that just planted this seed in my mind. Marcus's testimony continued as he explained how that seed of doubt had grown into full-blown denial, a psychological defense mechanism that allowed him to distance himself from the overwhelming responsibility of impending fatherhood. After Keisha said that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to remember if there had been a party at Brandon's house back then, if Jasmine had gone to it, if there'd been any time when she'd been weird or distant with me. And the more I thought about it, the more confused I got. My mind started playing tricks on me, making me doubt things I'd been sure about before. Judge Williams leaned forward, her expression stern. "Mr. Thompson, did you actually have any concrete evidence that Miss Rodriguez had been unfaithful to you? Or were you simply looking for reasons to doubt paternity because you were frightened?" The judge's question cut through the psychological justifications to the heart of the matter. Marcus struggled with his response, his face showing the internal conflict between honesty and self-preservation. "I didn't have real evidence, Your Honor. I just had Keisha saying she'd seen something, and my own fear telling me that maybe there was a way out of this situation. I know that makes me sound like a coward, and maybe I am, but I was 18 years old looking at my whole future changing, looking at giving up everything I'd been working toward, and part of me wanted to believe there was a chance the baby wasn't mine." His admission was damning in its honesty, revealing that his doubt had been rooted in hope rather than evidence. "Did you confront Miss Rodriguez directly about these allegations?" the judge asked. "Yeah, about 2 weeks before the baby was born. We got into a huge fight. I told her what Keisha had said, and Jasmine got really upset. She said she'd never been to any party at Brandon's house, that she didn't even know who Keisha was talking about, that Keisha was probably just starting drama because she'd had a thing for me in freshman year and was jealous. Jasmine was crying and yelling, asking how I could believe some random girl over her, over someone I'd been with for 2 years. And honestly, even while we were arguing, part of me knew she was telling the truth, but another part of me wanted the doubt to be real." The courtroom was silent, except for the soft sounds of baby Isaiah beginning to wake up in Carmen's arms. "After the baby was born, did you visit the hospital?" Judge Williams asked. Marcus nodded slowly. "I did, actually. My grandma made me go. She said whatever my doubts were, there was a baby that might be mine, and I needed to at least see him. So we went to the hospital the day after he was born." His voice softened slightly at the memory. "He was so small, just lying there in that clear bassinet thing. Jasmine looked exhausted, but she let me hold him. And when I was holding him, looking down at his face, I felt this rush of feelings. Fear, love, confusion, all mixed together. He had these tiny fingers that wrapped around my pinky. And for a minute, I thought maybe everything would be okay. Maybe I could do this." The testimony took a turn as Marcus described what happened in the days and weeks following Isaiah's birth, when the reality of a living, breathing infant made abstract fears concrete and undeniable responsibilities immediate. "After I left the hospital that day, I went home and just sat in my room for hours thinking about everything. My grandma came in and we talked about what I was going to do. She told me that if Isaiah was my son, I needed to step up and be a man about it, that running away from responsibility would just repeat the mistakes my father made. But she also said that if I had real doubts, it was okay to ask for a DNA test, that knowing for sure was better than wondering forever." His grandmother's practical wisdom had apparently given him permission to pursue the paternity test that brought them to court. "So I decided I needed to know for sure, one way or the other. I reached out to Jasmine and told her I wanted a DNA test, and she got so angry with me, angrier than I'd ever seen her. She said I was being disrespectful, that after everything we'd been through together, I should trust her, that asking for a test was like calling her a liar and a cheater. But I felt like I needed to know definitively before I committed to being a father. Is that wrong, Your Honor?" He directed the question to Judge Williams, seeking validation for a decision that had created the rift that brought them to court. The judge's expression remained neutral. "The court will determine paternity through DNA testing as part of these proceedings, Mr. Thompson. What the court is more interested in is your conduct since the baby's birth. Have you provided any financial support? Have you been involved in Isaiah's care?" Marcus's shoulders slumped as he shook his head. "No, Your Honor, I haven't given Jasmine any money or bought any baby supplies. I've seen Isaiah a few times when my grandma insisted on visiting, but I haven't really been involved in taking care of him. My reasoning was that until I knew for sure he was mine, I didn't want to get attached or take on responsibilities that might not be mine to take on. Looking back, I can see how that might seem cold, but I was trying to protect myself from getting hurt or used." His explanation revealed a self-protective instinct that had prioritized his own emotional safety over the needs of an infant who required care regardless of biological paternity. Jasmine's attorney stood for cross-examination, his expression conveying controlled contempt for the young man's testimony. "Mr. Thompson, you testified that you loved Jasmine, that she was your best friend. If that's true, why would you believe a random comment from someone you described as a jealous classmate over the word of someone you claimed to love?" The question was designed to highlight the inconsistency in Marcus's reasoning. Marcus struggled to find words that would make his actions seem rational. "I know it doesn't make sense. Love and trust should have been enough. But fear can make you do stupid things, believe stupid things." The cross-examination intensified as Jasmine's attorney challenged Marcus's timeline and motivations, attempting to demonstrate that his doubts were fabricated rather than genuine. "Mr. Thompson, you testified that Keisha mentioned this alleged party incident about a month before Isaiah was born, correct?" Marcus nodded affirmatively. "But you posted on social media about becoming a father, about having a son, months before that conversation with Keisha ever occurred. You were excited about this baby, publicly claiming him, until the reality of actually having to provide for him became imminent. Isn't that the real truth here?" The attorney's voice carried accusation masked as inquiry. Marcus's face flushed as he tried to defend himself. "I was excited, yeah, but being excited about the idea of something and being ready for the reality of it are two different things. When it was still months away, it didn't feel real. I could imagine being a father without actually having to do the work of being a father. But as it got closer, and I started thinking about diapers and formula and doctor's appointments and sleepless nights, I got overwhelmed. And when Keisha said what she said, it gave me something to hang my doubts on, even if those doubts weren't really about Jasmine's faithfulness." His admission was perhaps the most honest moment of his testimony, acknowledging that his doubt had been convenient rather than evidenced. "So you used an unverified rumor as an excuse to abandon your responsibilities?" The attorney pressed. "I wouldn't say I abandoned them. I just pressed pause until I could know for certain." Marcus protested weakly. "You pressed pause on supporting a child who needed food, diapers, formula, medical care. You pressed pause on supporting the mother of this child while she recovered from giving birth. Do you understand that infants can't be paused, Mr. Thompson? Their needs are immediate and constant, regardless of your doubts or fears." The attorney's questions were hammering home the practical consequences of Marcus's emotional retreat. Judge Williams intervened before the cross-examination could become overtly hostile. "Mr. Chen, I think we've established the witness's lack of support. Let's move forward." The judge turned to Marcus directly. "Mr. Thompson, if the DNA test proves you are Isaiah's biological father, are you prepared to accept your responsibilities, both financial and emotional?" Marcus was silent for a long moment, the question forcing him to confront the outcome he'd been avoiding. "Yes, Your Honor," he finally responded, his voice barely above a whisper. "If he's mine, I'll step up. I'll get a job. I'll help with money. I'll be there for him. I won't be like my father who walked away, but I needed to know for sure first. Is that really so wrong?" The vulnerability in his question suggested genuine confusion about whether his behavior had been reasonable or reprehensible. Dorothy Thompson, Marcus's grandmother, took the stand as the afternoon session began, her presence commanding despite her modest appearance, her Sunday church clothes carefully pressed, her Bible still clutched in one hand as she was sworn in with the other. She represented the older generation trying to guide young people through crises that seemed to recur in endless cycles despite hard. One wisdom passed down, Mrs. Thompson. Judge Williams began respectfully, acknowledging the woman's role as the stable adult influence in Marcus's life. Please tell the court about your grandson and your perspective on this situation. Dorothy settled into the witness chair with the dignity of someone who had weathered many storms, and knew this was simply another challenge to be met with faith and practical wisdom. Your Honor, Marcus is a good boy who's made some mistakes, but he's not a bad kid. He's grown up in difficult circumstances without his parents being reliable presences in his life, and I've done my best to raise him right while working full time to keep a roof over our heads and food on our table. He's never been in trouble with the law. He's stayed in school when many of his friends dropped out, and he's been trying to plan for a future beyond the limited opportunities available in our neighborhood. Her testimony sought to establish Marcus's character beyond this single crisis. When I learned about the pregnancy, I'll admit I was disappointed. I'd talked to Marcus about being careful, about not getting any girl pregnant, about how hard it is to raise children when you're young and without resources. But I also told him that if he'd created a life, he had a responsibility to that life, whether he felt ready for it or not. That's what adults do. They handle their responsibilities even when it's hard. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had lived those principles. Initially, Marcus seemed to accept that responsibility. He talked about getting a job, about helping Jasmine, about being a father. But as the pregnancy progressed, I watched him getting more and more anxious, staying in his room, becoming withdrawn. I knew he was scared. I'd seen that same fear in my own daughter when she got pregnant with Marcus at 16, before the drugs took over her life completely. The parallel was sobering, the generational pattern of teen pregnancy and fear painfully familiar. When Marcus came to me with his doubts about paternity, I asked him directly if he had any real reason to believe Jasmine had been unfaithful. He told me about what that girl Keisha had said, and I asked him if he'd ever seen Jasmine with another boy, if she'd ever given him reason not to trust her. He admitted he hadn't, so I told him the truth, that he was looking for an escape hatch, a way to avoid a responsibility that felt too heavy to carry. Dorothy's honesty about her grandson's motivations was refreshing, suggesting she hadn't come to court simply to defend him blindly, but to speak truth. Dorothy's testimony continued with maternal insight into both the fear that drove Marcus's denial and the importance of establishing paternity definitively, even when the answer might not be the one desired. I told Marcus that if he genuinely had doubts, asking for a DNA test wasn't wrong, that knowing for certain is better than spending years wondering, better for him and better for the child. But I also told him that using doubt as an excuse to avoid helping with that baby while waiting for test results was wrong. A child needs care whether you're biologically related or not, and if there's a possibility that baby is yours, you have a moral obligation to help, test or no test. Her testimony suggested a middle ground, acknowledging the validity of seeking certainty while condemning the abandonment of responsibility during the uncertainty. Did Marcus follow your advice? Judge Williams asked pointedly. Dorothy's expression grew pained. No, Your Honor, he didn't. He's been avoiding Jasmine and the baby, telling himself he's just waiting for the test results before getting involved. I've tried to encourage him to at least visit, to see Isaiah, to help Jasmine in whatever way he can. I've gone to visit myself a few times, brought some diapers and formula that I bought with my own money, because that baby shouldn't suffer for the confusion between these two young people. But Marcus has been stubborn, hiding behind his request for a test as justification for complete disengagement. The grandmother's disappointment in her grandson was evident, her testimony undermining any claim that Marcus's behavior had been appropriate or justified. Mrs. Thompson, based on your observations of Marcus and Jasmine's relationship, do you believe Isaiah is your grandson? The judge's question was direct, asking for the witness's honest assessment. Dorothy was silent for a long moment, her eyes moving from Marcus to Jasmine to the baby sleeping peacefully in Carmen's arms. Your Honor, in my heart, I believe that baby is Marcus's son. I saw how those two young people were together, completely wrapped up in each other for 2 years. I never saw Jasmine with anyone else, never heard any rumors about her seeing other boys. She was always at our house or Marcus was at hers. They were inseparable, and when I look at Isaiah, I see Marcus in that baby's face. The same eyes, the same chin, the same way he wrinkles his forehead when he's fussy. A grandmother knows these things. Her testimony carried the weight of intuitive knowledge, the kind that preceded scientific confirmation. But I also understand that Marcus needs scientific proof before he can fully commit to fatherhood. This generation trusts tests and evidence more than they trust their own observations or the words of people they love. So I support getting the DNA test, not because I have any real doubt, but because Marcus needs that paper with the results printed on it before he can move forward. Once he has that proof, I'll make sure he lives up to his responsibilities. Carmen Rodriguez was recalled to the stand to respond to Dorothy's testimony and provide additional information about the impact of Marcus's absence on both Jasmine and Isaiah, painting a picture of the practical hardships that resulted from denied paternity. Mrs. Rodriguez, Judge Williams began. Mrs. Thompson testified that she has visited and provided some support, even while her grandson has been absent. Can you verify that? Carmen nodded, her expression softening slightly. Yes, Your Honor. Dorothy has come to see the baby 3 times since he was born. She brought diapers, some formula, and a blanket she'd crocheted herself. She's been kind to Jasmine, apologizing for Marcus's behavior, saying she raised him better than this. I appreciate what Dorothy's done, but it doesn't change the fact that Marcus himself has provided nothing and has barely been present in his son's life. The distinction was important. The grandmother's support didn't absolve the father's absence. Can you describe the financial burden of caring for Isaiah without support from Marcus? The judge asked, directing the testimony toward the practical realities of single teenage parenthood. Carmen's voice grew strained as she outlined the costs. Your Honor, I'm working 2 jobs. I'm a cashier at a grocery store during the day, and I clean offices at night. Even with both jobs, money is tight. Formula alone costs about $150 a month. Diapers are another $100. Then there's baby clothes because he's growing so fast, doctor visits, medicine when he gets sick, a car seat for safety, a crib, bottles, everything an infant needs. I've been putting it all on credit cards because I don't have savings. I'm going into debt to take care of my grandson because the father won't acknowledge he exists. The financial strain was evident in her worn appearance, the dark circles under her eyes testament to working double shifts while helping care for an infant. And beyond the financial impact, what has Marcus's denial done to Jasmine emotionally? Judge Williams asked, understanding that the damage extended beyond money. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. It's broken her heart, Your Honor. She loved Marcus so much, trusted him completely. To have him deny their son, to have him essentially call her a liar and a cheater, it's devastated her. She cries almost every night after the baby's asleep. She's supposed to be enjoying her senior year of high school, going to prom, planning for graduation, maybe thinking about college. Instead, she's feeding a baby every 3 hours, changing diapers, dealing with sleep deprivation, and doing it all while the person who promised to be there for her acts like she and the baby don't exist. Do you know what that does to a young girl's self-esteem? To have the father of your child tell the world you're a cheater when you've been faithful. The emotional toll was as significant as the financial burden, affecting Jasmine's mental health during a vulnerable time. The court session moved toward its climax as Judge Williams prepared to reveal the results of the DNA test that had been ordered by the court weeks earlier. The scientific evidence that would either vindicate Marcus's doubts or confirm Jasmine's faithful testimony, determining not just biological relationships but the trajectory of multiple lives. Before I reveal these results, Judge Williams began, her voice carrying the gravity appropriate to the moment. I want to address both of you young people directly. Marcus, Jasmine, you are both 18 years old, barely adults yourselves, and you're here dealing with issues that challenge people twice your age. Regardless of what the DNA results show, you both need to understand something fundamental about parenthood. She paused, ensuring she had their complete attention, both young people's eyes fixed on her with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Parenthood isn't primarily about biology. Yes, biological relationships matter legally and for medical history purposes, but being a parent is about showing up day after day, feeding and changing and comforting and teaching and loving a child even when you're exhausted, even when you're scared, even when you don't feel ready. It's about putting someone else's needs before your own wants and fears. Some of the best parents in the world aren't biologically related to their children. They're adoptive parents, foster parents, step-parents who chose to love and raise children. And some biological parents are absent, abusive, or neglectful, their genetic connection meaning nothing in terms of actual parenting. The judge's words served as both education and admonishment, contextualizing the DNA results within a larger framework of what family truly meant. Marcus, you've testified that you needed scientific proof before committing to fatherhood. I understand the desire for certainty in our uncertain world, but I hope you also understand that your behavior during this period of uncertainty has consequences. You've hurt Jasmine deeply by questioning her faithfulness without evidence. You've left her to shoulder the enormous burden of infant care alone during the most challenging months. You've allowed your fear to override your compassion and responsibility. If these results show you are Isaiah's father, you'll need to work very hard to rebuild trust and establish yourself as a positive presence in your son's life. And if the results somehow show you're not the father, you'll need to reflect on whether your doubts were genuine or simply convenient. Marcus's head was bowed, unable to meet the judge's penetrating gaze. Jasmine, you've been faithful in your testimony and steadfast in your care of Isaiah despite overwhelming challenges. But you also need to understand that if Marcus is proven to be the father, your relationship with him going forward needs to be focused on parenting effectively, not on romantic reconciliation or punishment for his doubts. The best thing you can do for Isaiah is to find a way to work cooperatively with his father, if indeed that's what Marcus is, even though he's hurt you. Judge Williams opened the sealed envelope containing the DNA test results, the paper inside holding scientific certainty that would end speculation and doubt, establishing biological truth that would legally bind individuals and determine support obligations, custody arrangements, and family connections. The court has received results from DNA testing performed on Marcus Thompson and the minor child Isaiah Rodriguez, conducted by an accredited laboratory using standard paternity testing protocols that examine multiple genetic markers to establish biological relationships with greater than 99% accuracy. The judge's formal language underscored the scientific validity of what she was about to reveal, the methodology beyond dispute or personal interpretation. The courtroom fell into absolute silence, even baby Isaiah quiet in that moment as if aware of the significance of what was unfolding. Carmen reached for Jasmine's hand, squeezing it tightly. Dorothy closed her eyes and moved her lips in silent prayer. Marcus sat rigid in his chair, his knuckles white from gripping the armrests. In the matter of Rodriguez versus Thompson, concerning the paternity of the minor child Isaiah Rodriguez, born October 15th of this year, the DNA test results conclusively establish. The judge paused, her eyes moving from the paper to Marcus's face, that Marcus Thompson is the biological father of Isaiah Rodriguez with a probability of paternity of 99.97%. Marcus, Isaiah is your son. The words hung in the air like a verdict, which in essence they were, a biological verdict that preceded the legal determinations that would follow. Marcus's face drained of color, his body seeming to collapse inward even while remaining seated. The confirmation of what he'd apparently been hoping wasn't true hitting him with visible force. Jasmine let out a sob, whether of relief or vindication or simple emotional release was unclear, tears streaming down her face as her mother wrapped her in a tight embrace. Dorothy's eyes opened, her expression a mixture of resignation and determination. The grandmother now officially confirmed in that role, preparing mentally for the support she would need to provide. Judge Williams allowed a moment for the emotional reactions to crest before continuing with the legal determinations that flowed from the biological findings. Mr. Thompson, you are hereby legally established as the father of Isaiah Rodriguez. This determination carries with it specific responsibilities and rights. You are obligated to provide financial support for your son. The court will establish a child support order based on your current income and ability to pay. You are also granted the right to reasonable visitation with your son, with the specific schedule to be determined in consultation with Miss Rodriguez, with the child's best interests being the paramount consideration. If the parents cannot agree on a visitation schedule, the court will impose one. The proceedings concluded with Judge Williams issuing specific orders regarding child support, visitation rights, and requiring both young parents to attend co-parenting classes designed to help them navigate shared responsibility despite their broken romantic relationship, while also delivering a final admonishment that would hopefully guide them toward better choices. Marcus Thompson, you are ordered to pay child support in the amount of $350 per month, beginning immediately. I understand you're currently a student working part-time, so this amount is calculated based on your current earnings, but as your financial situation improves, this support obligation will be reviewed and adjusted accordingly. You're also ordered to cover 50% of Isaiah's medical expenses not covered by insurance. These are legal obligations, not optional contributions. Failure to pay can result in wage garnishment, license suspension, or other legal consequences. The judge's tone made clear that his obligations were no longer subject to his doubts or fears. Additionally, you are granted visitation rights every other weekend and one evening per week, with visits initially to be supervised by your grandmother or another approved adult until you've demonstrated consistent, appropriate engagement with your son. I'm also ordering both you and Miss Rodriguez to attend 12 weeks of co-parenting classes offered through the county. These classes will help you learn to communicate effectively about Isaiah's needs, separate your romantic feelings from your parenting responsibilities, and develop a cooperative relationship focused on raising a healthy, happy child. The judge paused, looking at both young people with an expression that mixed sternness with compassion. I know this isn't the life either of you imagined for yourselves at 18. You both probably had dreams about finishing high school, going to college, starting careers, eventually falling in love and having children when you were ready and established. Those dreams aren't necessarily dead. They are significantly complicated now. You're going to have to work harder than your peers without children, sacrifice more, juggle more responsibilities. But millions of young parents before you have navigated this path and built good lives for themselves and their children. Isaiah didn't ask to be born, didn't choose his circumstances, but he deserves parents who will do their best for him regardless of how they feel about each other. Judge Williams gathered her papers, preparing to close the session. Marcus, you've spent months avoiding responsibility because you wanted scientific proof. Now you have that proof. The question becomes, what kind of man, what kind of father are you going to choose to be? Will you step up and embrace your son, learn to care for him, contribute to his well-being? Or will you continue to resist and resent this responsibility, becoming like the absent father you grew up without? The choice is yours, but understand that your choices will shape not just Isaiah's life, but your own. Children remember who showed up for them and who didn't. She turned to Jasmine with a gentler expression. Jasmine, you've been vindicated today. Your truthfulness has been confirmed, your faithfulness established beyond doubt. But vindication doesn't pay bills or change diapers or soothe a crying baby at 3 in the morning. Your real challenge continues to be raising Isaiah to the best of your ability, accepting whatever help and support Marcus is willing and able to provide, and finding a way to move forward without bitterness consuming you. This court case is over, but your role as a mother continues every single day. With a final strike of her gavel, Judge Williams declared the case concluded. The legal determination made, paternity established, obligations defined. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus stood slowly and approached Jasmine hesitantly, his voice barely audible as he said simply, "I'm sorry, can I hold him?" Jasmine looked at him for a long moment, years of love and months of hurt warring in her expression, before carefully transferring Isaiah into his father's arms for the second time in his young life, this time with certainty rather than doubt defining the moment. The young father looked down at his son, tears finally falling as the reality of fatherhood fully settled upon his shoulders, no longer avoidable or deniable, but simply real and inescapable. In that moment, whatever came next, 3 lives were forever intertwined by biology confirmed, responsibility established, and the fragile hope that somehow, despite everything, they would find a way to provide the love and stability that Isaiah deserved.